I think for me, I've always kind of seen it as 0 degrees as the point where water becomes ice. So for me, that was the nicest idea is when one thing becomes another, and you could see it on many levels in the piece. When a dead body, when a body that you think is sleeping is actually dead, and you make that shift. When Akram becomes me and I become Akram, when the territory of one goes over the territory of the other, when one transforms in the other. For us, 0 degrees was this point of transformation.
The in-between space between, and that's what we were exploring, the in-between space between the visual arts, where it ends, and where does dance begin. We were exploring the in-between space, the in-between space between life and death, the in-between space between two borders, two countries. Because one thing we found very much in common, Larbi and I, is that he's Moroccan, but he's also Flemish, and so there's this, and even though I'm British Asian, I'm born in London, but I feel pretty Bangladeshi when I'm here. I realise how Bangladeshi I am, but when I'm in Bangladesh, I realise how British I am. So I'm never complete in one place. The starting point was the friendship, actually. It started before it actually started. So we met in Belgium, where I needed a dancer, and a mutual friend of both Larbi and me, and I introduced each other. So I met him, and there was an immediate connection. But at that moment, he was starting his own company, so he couldn't join my company. So we stayed in touch for 3 years, and in those 3 years, we said, "Oh, let's work together."
We felt it was time to do something together and to just have maybe a bit of a moment of relief from the responsibilities towards a bigger group, towards a company, and do something more for ourselves. So that's in 2003 we started to work, and it's in that period that we took a month or something just to explore things together.
We were courting with each other, it's a relationship. So we were flirting with each other's ideas and being attracted, like a moth to a light. And so in a way we were very much, it was so free. We were playing all the time, playing with ideas, playing with concepts, anything and everything.
This is the period in which he told me the story that became kind of the base or the undertone of the piece. And it was done by filming him. I asked him to tell me tales of his adventures of his, and he spoke about his long voyage in India, and it took really it took 4 hours or so. It was really long, and I kept on filming, and he was telling, and in the beginning we weren't really sure if we were going to use any of it, but it was more like a way of getting to know each other, and I really like to work like that, always kind of getting to know different stories, because I find it so fascinating. It's like it's epic stories. Even if it's very personal, it actually becomes it goes beyond that. And we just selected a little piece that we felt like, let's try and learn this in the way I used to work with text, because he liked that way of working. And his gestures are very much his own, but at the same time, sometimes they are he can't help it. It's also Katak, because he's brought up with that. So I liked the fact. Also, he's an extremely good storyteller, Akram. He really has this innate ability to tell a tale, and so I felt, he's the perfect person to do this with.
In the beginning, it was very much an exchange of movement language. He would share with me his gestures, his language of gestures, which I'm fascinated by, because in Indian dance we use hands in a very strong way, in a very emotional way, and I would teach him Kathak, share with him Kathak every morning, and then also with the text, even though it's my story, it's his system of this synchronization, and so there was ideas that we were bringing into the work. So in a way, I would go into his aesthetic, he would come into my aesthetic.
And what I remember is that there's these guards there who look very, very powerful. And they don't have glamorous, powerful, whatever kind of army kind of clothes. They're dressed in very simple shirts and trousers. But what was interesting was their expression on their face made them very powerful. And actually, it's that expression in the eyes that kind of made me feel like, or that was saying to me like, you are under my control, and you know it.
What's fantastic about this system, what I admire about this system is the fact that it's extremely, it's movement within text. So you see the rhythm and the musicality and the movement of the text, basically. Movement of the text.
So I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking about all this, and I'm really nearly so frustrated that, out of frustration, not out of sadness, but out of frustration, I feel like I want to cry. My head is really wanting to explode. And as I'm sitting there looking really, really down, I see this man. And you know when you look at something, to look at an animal or a person and they're still, because you can never really achieve stillness. You're constantly in motion. Even in life you're in motion because you have to breathe. But also in death your body continues to decompose. So in life and death you're continuously in motion.
When we talk, we don't pay attention to the way we gesture, except if we do something very specific. But in general, we do a lot of gestures, and there's a lot of positions with the hand, at the mouth, at the eyes, at the ear, at the nose, at the skin. You go to your neck. Sometimes you have to scratch, and all these things mean something. They mean something beyond the words. So when I started to work around the concept of theater, next to the idea of dance, for me theater had lacked a lot of things. It lacked the honesty of a real encounter in which people don't speak with cleaned text. It's not like a theater text. For me, is often not a real text. It's so cleaned up that it's not human anymore, and I have a hard time listening to theater text sometimes because it's too clean. So it doesn't help me perceive the truth. And so what I like to do is film people and look at them for what they really are, how they really speak, with all the hesitations in it, with all the moments of no, and going back into the sentence, and the melody and the intonation and the way all of this is placing itself, the way the movements are placing themselves. I think there's our way of talking to each other is much more than just clean words on a piece of paper.
So what's interesting is that when you look at a person and they're still, sometimes your eyes play tricks on you, and you feel like they're actually moving, and you can actually, what you actually see, or you clarify, is that actually you're seeing the most intricate movement.
So I like to choreograph body language, and it was something that Akram has always been sensitive to in my work, but also he actually does that with his Katak. Because Katak, when you see a story told in Katak, it is done with exactly those gestures. And so suddenly a style in which we talk about mudras becomes one about just gestures that mean things. And our everyday gestures also mean things. So all of us are dancing, all of us are communicating with a form of choreography. And then we started to think, who are the other people we'd like to work with? And then Anthony Gormley came into the picture because he had been in contact with Akram, being interested in dance, because Anthony's he's a sculptor. They're very lonely people working on their own and kind of having a very, I think Anthony felt like he wanted to work with real human beings instead of all the cast
I was presenting my first full-length work called Gosh, and so Anthony was there, I think the premiere or something, and he was really tall, he's really tall, and so this was this big giant saying, "I love bodies." That's the first thing he said, "I love bodies," and I was like, "Good for you." And I was trying to wonder, where is he coming with this? I didn't know he was Anthony Gormley.
Because Anthony had always been working with casts, with body casts, for him it was always his body. So it was interesting to do something for us and to take it from our bodies, because we were the dancers from the performance. And then in the beginning, Anthony wanted to have 100 casts of us, but then we didn't have the budget for that. And then slowly but surely we came to an agreement that actually 2 bodies, one of Akram and one of me, was the perfect balance.
And we were quite excited because for us it was like, it's an experience. It's not literally they take a photograph and that's one thing, but to physicalize it, to be in that suffocation where they mask you and everything, and so you can't breathe, you can't hear, you're closed off, and then eventually half an hour later, after sweating in this heat. They pull off they cut with a knife the mask, and you have to be so patient. It's so heavy. When it solidifies the material, your chest is blocked. It was an experience. So in a way, in a humble way, it feels like we gave birth. In a subtle way. I'm sure it's nothing compared to birth, but it felt like we had given birth to ourselves.
It was very confronting, because you're used to see yourself in a mirror, especially as a dancer. You have to, look at yourself all the time to correct things, but to see yourself in 3D and to be aware that, oh, that's how my cheekbone is, and that's how my nose is, and that's very confronting. It's really, in the beginning I didn't like it at all, and then slowly but surely you started to accept yourself. So it was really a journey of self-acceptance, dealing with the dummy and dealing with yourself, and accepting your form, and relating to it.
It was amazing, our first rehearsal, because with Anthony, he came. We were rehearsing in Belgium, so he came with a black bin liner covering the dummy, just holding it. So he said, he walked in and he said, "Bloody hell, I had such a grief from the security guards. Trying to put this thing through the X-ray, and everybody's looking at me like I'm some weirdo or something." And I was like, "Yeah, you could look like a weirdo. You look like you're carrying a dead body, covered in a cloth, in a black bin liner. It looks a bit dodgy." And so that was our first rehearsal. He bought the prototype, which was a copy of me, and we were struggling with it. In the sense, we didn't have a connection on the first day of rehearsal with this dummy. And I proposed that maybe we give it a name. So we said the opposite of Akram, Marka. And the second we gave it a name, it became alive for us suddenly. And so on the way out, they turned the lights off. We finished rehearsal, and I looked at Marka on the floor, and I was like, "Oh, you can't just leave him on the floor." So I sat him up and put him down. I said, "We'll be back." A connection was made. It's amazing, by a name, giving something a stamp or a name that you're sharing something with that, to try and reach your hand up for that connection. Something happens, and so the second day the rehearsal was much more connected in a more human level. Suddenly the dummy was not a dummy anymore. It became alive. My relationship with Ladby's dummy really evolved, and his relationship with my dummy really evolved, because my dummy was crap. My dummy couldn't stand up, his one could, so I was really jealous. He liked my one because it could move in different parts of the joint, so we were attracted to each other's dummies.
I think it has to do with the fact that I'm used to relate to Akram, so it was easy to relate to his dummy. And same thing for Akram, he was used to deal with me, so also used to deal with my dummy. And to relate with yourself it's very difficult. It's the hardest exercise. I know that the moment I am facing my own dummy, it's the most aggressive moment, the most funny and aggressive one, and people laugh, but they also feel a little bit uncomfortable when I'm shaking the hand and there's this kind of friendship, and then the dummy kind of hits me down, but it's not the dummy, it's myself. I'm using the dummy in a way to make myself be a victim, and it's that kind of relationship with yourself, and the way we fool ourselves, putting up a role and being again the victim, because this person is doing this to me, and you're like, no, you're doing this to yourself, and you're using the person as an excuse to do this to yourself. And so these were the topics that I felt like talking about when I was relating to my own dummy. But our characters were opposites. Like Akram was much more the one who was always standing up. His dancing is one of a certain pride. There's something very, and my dancing was much more flowy and much more kind of underwater, like all the time flowing underneath it. But our dummies were the opposite. My dummy was the one who could stand and was very static and strong in a way, and then his was one that would never be able to stand up. So it was very yin and yang.
So in the end of the piece, you see me putting his dummy up and him lying down with my dummy, singing the song, and me performing beside his dummy. I think what's interesting with the dummies is to allow it space. And so in a way, we were really... This is where Larbi and I had a conflict, but an interesting conflict, but not in a negative way. It was really challenging to find a solution, where he felt the ending should be very much where the hands are held, the four hands, and I said no, it can't be the ending. We have to do something after it and leave the space for the dummies. We have to finish with the dummies, because we started with the dummies. When you've been through a journey until the end, you've transformed as an audience in your relationship to the dummy, because you've seen what's happened to the dummy and what the dummy represents. So the dummy becomes something else for you as an audience. What's important is that transformation, where I become the dummy. In the end, we become the dummies, and the dummies become the human.
What I found interesting with Nitin, being who he is, he connects his emotions or his emotional states also with a social situation. So he could relate to it on many levels. And from that he was trying to find and translate what we needed. So every time he was making propositions, certain themes, I found fascinating that he was using a lot the guitar. So he's a very, very gifted guitar player. So sometimes a certain riff or a certain melody line, he would just play it on the guitar and be like, look, Akram, this is what I'm gonna, what do you think of this? And, so sometimes he wrote, sometimes he jammed, sometimes he counted, sometimes it was related to the steps we were making. So he was finding different entrances into the dance.
I think in all collaborations, particularly 0 Degrees, it worked very instinctively. It was at the present. That's the difference. We were not dealing with the past. We were in the present all the way through the process. So in that moment, when we're together, sometimes I would step into the music world, Nitin would step into the choreography. Our boundaries started to disappear somehow. You know, who is the visual artist, who is the choreographer, who is the director, who's the composer.
And then there was a lot of trust from him. He also trusted Akram a lot in his way of dealing with rhythm. So sometimes he was like, yeah, you can recompose it if you feel like it, depending on how the steps are evolving. And because Akram for me is also a very gifted musician. So he was able to translate this too. I mean, Akram was working a lot with the musicians, kind of as a prolongation of the work of Nitin.
When Nitin was there, he would watch a little bit and he would instinctively react with the musicians, workshop with them, and then I would propose something, or Larbi would propose his song, and so from there it was very much of an exchange. You know, you breathe in and you breathe out. So breathe in, you take in, and you breathe out, you give out. So in a way, we were doing this continuously. It was never static.
Akram said that during rehearsal, he took a scientific line and you took a spiritual line.
Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. I think I can agree with that. It's true that he was very, but there's no real difference with it. I mean, he was very mathematical about rhythms, about how to sustain something and then go on, and he was counting. Everything was numbers. And I love that. I mean, I really love it. And especially with someone like Akram, who's so gifted at it. It was just such a challenge to constantly count, because I'm okay with numbers, but I don't have that gift, you know, that gift of going beyond, being able to, I mean, he can play a rhythm with his hand and then say another one and then correct you if you're doing another one. So he has this kind of layeredness when it comes to rhythms, and that I found it super intriguing, and I felt like I want to learn to be able, because it's also experience. He has this very long experience in this, and I think I was mostly. It's true that I was mostly looking for meaning, as to what what do I read when we move together? Why do we stop being together? What happens? I was always kind of cause and effect. So everything was about, well, I stop because you this, and because I then that, you do that, and it felt like, like I was looking for the causality or the reason behind a song or a text, or if I could justify it within the bigger whole, it always felt right. And Akram was mostly busy with constructing the inner structures with numbers.
For me, what's very important about Zero is that when the dummies are there, you don't feel like this is a visual art. You feel it's absolutely relevant to the work. The genres don't separate. The theatre, the text, is crucial to the movement that follows. The text is crucial for the movement to come, and the movement is crucial for the text to come. When text comes out, there has to be a need for it, but the movement is coming towards an end to the point where you can't say it by movement anymore, so the text comes out. So this kind of transition and interplay between when the dummies are used, when the dummies are not used, why the dummies are used. The question is why. Why at that moment that you need the dummy because you can't say it by yourself? And if you can answer those questions, then you are merging, you're bridging the different or the boundaries. You're kind of breaking down the boundaries of that aesthetic, of that world, the visual arts world, the dance world, the theatre world, and the music world.